London, Getty, London, September 21st. I am coming to London, and Left It Wall is going to be screening at the Bill Murray at 3 p.m. That's September 21st, the Bill Murray, 3 p.m. It will be the only UK screening of Left It Wall. Can't wait to see you there. Grab your tickets now at romplicone.com. London, can't wait to see you again. It's been too long. romplicone.com for tickets. See you September 21st. Episode 46, Andrew Frank. Andrew Frank is a comedian and performer based in Seattle, Washington. They're queer, pansexual, and use they-them pronouns. They grew up in a fundamentalist Christian household where their dad was a fundamentalist minister. We talk about the journey, the joy of Fringe Festivals, and Andrew's newest show where they satirize an Evangelical Minister. Please welcome to the show, Andrew Frank. Andrew Frank, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a while. Good to see you. So let's start at the beginning. Tell me about your background. Tell me how you grew up. I know it comes across a lot in your work, but kind of give everyone the skinny who may not know you.
Sure. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian church and school in Missouri, and my dad was pastor of my church. Really, really deep into sort of evangelical conservative Christian culture throughout the end of high school. But then I started doing stand-up comedy at the St. Louis Funny Bone right out of high school, and started touring right out of high school, and just sort of learned a lot about myself, and became a performing artist and never stopped. So that's the short version.
Well, what's a little bit of the long version? Like, how did you find your way to stand-up comedy from that upbringing? Did you connect with that upbringing at any point? And then what made you walk away from it?
Yeah, good question. Well, one influence that's sort of odd is my basketball coach, one of their friends growing up, is like one of the most famous Christian comedians. His name is Tim Hawkins. He sort of does like a Weird Al, it's like parody songs of praise and worship songs and that sort of thing. Anyway, so I knew who he was, and I saw him live a couple times. And just the idea that somebody could be a comedian, that was a real job that you could have. Like, he's one of the first people that I knew that did that. Other than that, just like lots of chances to perform at my church or at church camp or in my high school plays and that sort of thing. Like, it was like in a really small community, so I got lots of chances to write and perform my own stuff in those settings. And so, I was just always the kid at school or at church camp that was like getting on stage and telling funny stories, and became known for that. And then got really excited to do that. Like, I would think about that all the time. I would think about like, what stories can I tell? And I would be writing stuff so that I could tell people at church the next time I saw them or whatever. So, that's partly it. Then I did the high school talent show at Christian high school, and I did just with original stand-up, and I did well in that. And then I started going to this open mic that was like a music and poetry open mic in St. Charles, Missouri, and they just like all the musicians got to do 3 songs, which were like 5 minutes each. So I convinced the host to let me do 15 minutes of stand-up every Tuesday and Thursday as a teenager. So that was like probably from 15 to 18. So that's where I first started performing, especially performing for kids that weren't in my church or at my school. So that was the first time meeting other artists and just people who were outside of my church.
So then you started going to the Funny Bone. Now, during this time, did you hold Christian fundamentalist views? Were you questioning things? Where were you at there?
Yeah, I had huge doubts, but I really lacked the vocabulary or I didn't really have much of an alternative or other options for belief. So I didn't really know what I believed. I really cared about comedy. I really cared about art, and the ideas that were in the art that I was consuming at the time, and the conversations that pursuing that art, and meeting other people who liked the art that I liked. Those conversations and relationships led to a lot of me discovering what I did believe. but that just kept changing and growing. But yeah, I had huge doubts, and it's a very difficult thing because when you're in those communities, even if you don't really believe, you really have to mask really hard. You have to act like you're still Christian, or like you're kind of going back and forth between like, I want to believe, but I don't. And like, what does that say about me that I can't perform this faith? Like, what is it about me that I can't believe in this stuff? Like, it's a shortcoming on your part. And so just, that was, I felt really bad a lot of the time, which is why comedy is so helpful. It's because it like, made me feel pretty good. It allowed me to explore some of these ideas and talk about these things in a way that didn't hurt my body or my brain so much. You know what I mean?
So what led to the doubt? What started the doubt?
I probably meeting people outside of that circle, whether it be at those open mics I was talking about, or like traveling basketball teams. Like I played on summer basketball teams, and was like, on the bus and staying in hotels and stuff and going to team dinners and stuff. And I remember this kid, his name was Alex, and he was the first kid to ever like question me about like intelligent design versus evolution. And I was like, I believed in intelligent design back then. And we got in this really long conversation about it, and I just couldn't really defend my position. I remember that really clearly, that particular conversation. But then just lots of stand-up, like whether it be, George Carlin or David Cross or Bill Hicks or these people. They were some of the first people I heard talking about religion in a critical way. And even when I still was holding on to some of the beliefs, I was still laughing at some of this stuff. And I was like, started asking myself, why am I laughing at this if it goes against what I believe? Stand-up was a huge, huge deal for me. Because it talked about those things from such a different angle,
Where were your parents throughout all this? When you were doing comedy and you were, expressing yourself artistically, were they supportive? Were they indifferent? Were they aware? Were you sneaking out at night, Bill Hicks style? Like, what was the anatomy of all that?
That's a good question. I think they knew to some degree. I don't think they really knew what I was saying on stage. When it comes to like, the stand-up influences that I was having at the time, I would buy them secretly at Slackers, this used CD store at the mall. I would buy them and then I would hide them in my ceiling. My mom found this Patton Oswalt album that I had one time. I think it was My Weakness is Strong. And she listened to it and she made notes about all the things that were inappropriate about each joke. I got
how long was that?
It was like a whole sheet of paper, like one piece of. But yeah, there was lots of there was some. It was particularly this joke about, I don't know if you've heard it, but this thing about George W. Bush and the sky demons. Do you know this joke? It's this joke about like
sounds
people
vaguely
are like,
familiar.
Yeah, it's like, people are gonna, comedians, you must love George W. Bush because it's all this material, so you're gonna hate when he leaves office. And then the joke is like, what if for the last 8 years these sky demons were coming down from the sky and ripping people apart, and then they left, but I had a great 5 minutes on those sky demons.
Okay,
anyway, that's the premise.
Gotcha.
It's a little more graphic language than that, but that was the premise. And I remember she got really mad at that one.
So she went through all of it with you. Then did she find the rest of your stash of comedy or no?
No, just that one, just that album.
So you had to say goodbye to Patton. Did she confiscate it? Or
yeah. I didn't get it back.
Did you ever get it back? You have it today?
No, I don't have it.
Oh wow! What if you found out she was secretly listening to it and laughing, and that's why you never got it back?
Yeah. But other than that, like my parents didn't really come to those open mics. They drove me to open mic one time at a bar because I was too young to get into the bar. So they did get me into a bar one time after football practice. They came to the Funny Bone a couple times, but I remember like hosting for Anthony Jeselnik when I was like 18 or 19, and that was my first like big hosting gig, and they they just didn't like they didn't like what he did. They didn't like what I did. And so then we, they didn't come to many shows after that. And that was kind of hard for me, but it probably is for the best. Yeah, and then I was just on the road all the time, or I was just in other cities, or yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I answered the question, but yeah.
No, you did, but and I know you talk about this a lot in your act, so I wanted to kind of see where this was in the equation of things. Like where did your sexuality come into all this? Like how did that evolution occur?
Yeah, like in terms of queerness, I didn't really again lack the vocabulary for that type of stuff. Like, didn't have the framework for that until I moved to Seattle, and then I just started meeting the people that I really loved, and the people I really connected with were all queer people, and that gave me the room to start like exploring some of that stuff in myself, and like to go with those feelings and stuff, and to see how long it had had been with me my whole life and that sort of thing, and that it's a beautiful and good thing. So yeah, just in the last 5 years, I've been pretty open about that, but yeah, that's a journey too. There's lots of growth and discovery there as well. Yeah.
Well, so unpack some of that for me. Like, was this going on simultaneously while you were doing comedy? Were you having questions? Were you concerned? Did you think, oh, something might be wrong with me, or what was kind of going on?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, lots of doubts like that about mental health and that sort of thing. In this past year, I got an autism diagnosis, which has made things a lot more clear for me. And things are really interconnected too. The queerness and experience of gender and neurodiversity. Those things are all pretty linked. And definitely the way that I process information, the way that I have sensory experience as an autistic person, definitely informed my relationship to religion and the sort of educational structures, the sort of like the structure of the environment and the social rules in place in those Christian environments. Like in this past year, I've really been looking at those experiences through the lens of autism, and it makes a lot more sense to me why I was like why I was experiencing visceral pain from the sort of from the rules, or the sort of like the intensity of the information, or the rigidness of the information, or the misinformation that I was being given, or the information that was being withheld from me. Like, those things that really hurt me physically. I've felt those things really deeply. Yeah, sorry, what was the original question?
Well, I just asked, like how did your sexuality come into all this? Was that going on simultaneously as you were expressing yourself artistically? Were you still in the church in Missouri having those questions? And just give me a peek under the hood to what all that was like for you.
Yeah, definitely wasn't really actively questioning those things when I was in the church, but I kind of like stopped believing around 14 or 15. I just had to be in those places because there were no other options. Mm-hmm. In terms of like sexuality and gender and stuff, like, I've always had like, really, really strong committed relationships, romantic relationships, primarily with women, and they were monogamous relationships. So I never really thought about the other stuff because it was, in monogamous structures. But after I moved to Seattle and started getting more sort of, like meeting other people and seeing other modes of living and lifestyles, I started dating a couple people at the same time and started exploring more of that. That was really helpful because there were parts of myself that I couldn't understand in a strictly monogamous relationship.
So what was it that was helpful for you?
Just the experience. Exploring experiences and seeing how I felt about things. Following what felt good. Yeah.
So what does queerness mean to you?
That's a good question. To me, it's a what makes it so useful is that it's pretty open, it's pretty vague. It allows room to grow and to explore. Um, for me, this huge sort of wave of relief, psychologically, physiologically, etc., happened when I, dropped some, he him pronouns and stopped trying to be in this box of what is considered a man. I was not meeting a lot of those expectations, or those expectations were being put on me, and it never really felt right, and it was just like way more of a problem than it was helpful. But using they them pronouns these last 3 years has really been nice, because it's because they don't have a bunch of rigid expectations or stereotypes and stuff that go along with it. It's it really is it's much more open, and I feel myself being much more gentle, much more open, embodying that sort of gender position just makes a lot more sense to me. It more accurately describes the way I feel about myself. But the funny thing about pronouns and stuff is that again, back to sort of vocabulary, or just the ways that people talk about these things. Like whenever people ask what are your pronouns, back in the day, even when I moved to Seattle, when I was meeting people and they were asking me, I would say he him because that's what people called me. But I never understood that. I was never told that that you that it is that it is up to you, and you have a say in the matter. I just thought it was how are people perceiving you? So to be able to sort of get some agency there, and to be able to say this is how I perceive myself, and this is my relationship to myself, has been really, really nice.
The first time I ever saw it, because it was one of those things where it was just never, like you kind of said, it was just never addressed that way before, where it's no, tell people. I saw it at a NACA conference, and I know you know what that is, but for anyone, that's the National Association for Campus Activities, where you basically go to try to get college gigs. And I didn't know what it was, so I thought it was an organization that somebody was a member of. I just didn't know. And so they were talking to me, and they said, "Hey, I enjoyed your set." I said, "Oh, thank you so much." And I said, "They, them, what is that? Is that a campus organization? What do y'all do? That sounds really cool." And it made them laugh. They weren't offended. They thought it was funny that I just didn't know what that was. And then they explained it to me, and I thought that was really cool. I thought kind of your reaction. I thought, oh, that's neat that the people can kind of say, well, this is where I'm at. This is where I'm at. And yeah, I think it's a cool thing. But anyway, so when did you move to Seattle?
January 2019.
Okay, so you've been there a couple minutes. How has that informed your comedy? Or has it?
It's been, absolutely. Probably the biggest influence on my comedy. I made great friends up here. I have a great home club, Laughs Comedy Club in the University District, where I get tons of great stage time every Wednesday, Thursday. I get these long sets in front of these great college crowds, and 4 semesters a year, I teach an introduction to stand-up comedy course. It's a little 5-week course, and we do big graduation shows. I've been doing that since we came out of quarantine, and have had over 400 alumni. It's been a pretty huge thing here in Seattle. I love teaching. I love talking about the craft of comedy, and have made really great friends in a nice community that's really supportive when it comes to my shows. And just really grown as an artist, and have a really steady, work and art environment at that club and at a bunch of the venues here. And I've been able to do a lot of things on stage that I didn't feel comfortable doing in the past, because I was a little more scared about. I had much greater worker insecurity back in the day about oh no, what if I stop getting booked, and that sort of thing. It's really a precarious position to be in. But here I have really good, steady work, and people respect what I do and know what I do. And so I'm getting on the right stages in front of the right people. It's really cool. One huge part of that is that, so last year at Edinburgh, you saw me do an hour of stand-up, and we were on that, I added that compilation show, and we performed in front of like 2 people or whatever.
That was so much
together.
fun, though.
It was fun.
That was so much fun. Honestly, and I'm not just pandering here, but some of my favorite memories of that Fringe Festival, and I had a lot of great ones, but honestly, I really loved getting to know you and your partner a little bit better, and just kind of hanging out and having breakfast before a long day of the Fringe and getting that morning set in. And yeah, we usually didn't have a huge audience, but they were very eager for entertainment. So they were always small but mighty bunches. And it was a freaking blast.
It was fun. Yeah. So anyway, after last year, I saw so many cool clowning shows and experimental comedy shows. And so I challenged myself. I got really inspired, and I was like, okay, when I get home in September 2023, I'm going to start working on a new act. I'm going to start getting into sort of more clowning stuff, weird stuff. And so when I got home, on the plane and all that stuff at the end of the festival, I started writing an act as this preacher character. So I'd play a pastor on stage. And when I got home to Seattle, I was going out to open mics in this costume as the pastor, and I was just like doing open mic comedy as the pastor. And I worked on it for a whole year, and I have a whole new hour as that character that I'm doing this year at the Fringe. And there's no way I could have developed that character, or all that material, or all this sort of take all the performance risks it takes to really make a cool and weird show like that. I could not have done that if I didn't live in Seattle. And if I didn't have access to queer shows and queer crowds, because there's a regular Monday show here called Queers to the Front at Comedy Bar in Capitol Hill, and I went almost every Monday for the whole year, and just worked on 5 minutes at a time doing this pastor character, and it's really evolved, and it's like some of the most funny and fun stuff I've ever done on stage. So that's like a huge step of growth for me lately. That comes from Seattle and from the Fringe.
Yeah. That's wonderful. So let's and I want to talk a little more in depthly about the new show here a little later. Yeah. But before we really dive in there, I want to fill in a few more gaps. So before you got to Seattle, were you doing the road at all, or what was your comedy life like before then?
Oh yeah. I was based in St. Louis, and I was probably working at the St. Louis Funny Bone, featuring and headlining off nights and stuff. Every couple months, very very small comedy community at that time. So I was getting a lot of work, but then I started going on the road. I started getting less work there because I wasn't at the club as much. But I was, I loved Go Bananas in Cincinnati. I loved Peoria, the Jukebox Comedy Club in Peoria, Illinois. Did lots of shows in Indianapolis, and trying to think of just a lot of Midwest comedy. Springfield, Missouri, there's a club called Blue Room Comedy Club. I was doing that quite a bit. In my early 20s, I was doing like lots of one-nighters at like American Legion halls and these sorts of things.
Oh yeah,
and they weren't a good fit for me. And I sometimes it went okay, but most of the time it didn't. And but I was just one of the sort of when people asked like who's a comic to book in Missouri, like my name would come up. So like I got some work at these places. In some ways it made me a good performer because I really had to sort of fight for my art sometimes. But in other ways it really sort of wreaked havoc on my central nervous system. And I'm fortunate to not to have other shows that I book now. But it is part of my journey doing those one-nighters and stuff. Or very briefly worked for Funny Business. I got booked in Dodge City, Kansas the night after Trump got elected, so I guess it was November 9th, 2015. I was doing a show in Dodge City, Kansas, and was supposed to host and do like 30 minutes on stage, and I got kicked off stage at like minute 28.
A minute 28.
No. At minute 28. So I did
Oh, at
28
minute
minutes.
28. Okay.
Yeah. And I was like about to wrap up, and they kicked me off stage. It was ridiculous. Yeah, but then I had a couple other gigs booked with them, and Funny Business canceled those gigs and stuff. So that was a long time ago. And I understand their position on that. But yeah, that was some of the sort of road work coming up. But then I started doing a bunch of fringe festivals. I started with some of the smaller ones like St. Louis and Pittsburgh, and where else? Then I did Edmonton. Edmonton is great, and it conflicts with. Yeah, it's also in August, so you can't do Edinburgh if you do it. But
Right.
that one was incredible. And then Vancouver. But anyway, yeah, I just started going okay, I want to do fringe shows in front of fringe audiences, and I'll just book the show, build the hour, and just start doing it that way. So
what made you decide to do that?
Just for the creative freedom, and I don't have any TV credits or anything, and wasn't getting on some of the other I was getting feature work at clubs, and if I ever showed up at a club or did a contest, or if I got some stage time at a club, usually I would get booked at that club because they could see what I was capable of. But just sort of emailing people or cold calling places, that wasn't really working. So it's just Fringe Festival, you get an hour of stage time, and I can do whatever I want in my show. That was a huge deal for me. So yeah, probably from 2014 or 15 on, I started doing Fringe Festivals. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a newer arrival to that whole world. I mean, I've always loved the idea of the Edinburgh Fringe, and I always wanted to do it, but it literally took me about, I guess, 15 years until I finally freaking got there. Because if there's always 1,000,005 reasons to not do it, but there's 1,000,006 reasons to do it. And I just there was always something, especially because I was a road comic for about 5 years, and I loved it. I'm glad I had that experience. I would not trade it. But the other side of that is you really have to be economically wise. And when you're going 1 week at a time, 1 gig at a time, 1 month at a time, it's hard to justify getting on a plane in August when you got 3 club weeks within driving distance. So there was always something keeping me from going, always.
Yeah.
And finally, I moved out to LA, and then of course LA has LA stuff that keeps you kind of grounded. And then finally, the pandemic happened. And as we were getting out of that, I kind of realized, well, what are some things on the list that I just have not got around to doing that I better get around to doing? And that was a big one. And now I kind of want to always do it that way. I mean, I'm not going to Edinburgh this year. I'm skipping this year, but I'm hoping to go back next year with a new show and with a play. I want to do 2 things. And yeah, I just kind of fell in love with that way of doing what we do. And I don't think I ever want to go back to anything else.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm in the same boat. I do love the years I spent on the road, and grew up as a person so much throughout those things, and I'm sure I'll work the road in the future to some extent. But this idea of you work on your show all year, and then you do your show for a month straight, and every show is within walking distance, and you're around thousands of other performers. So there's just all this inspiration and all these potential connections and relationships there. That's the way I want to experience touring, because it can be so lonely to be out there by yourself in your car, driving to the gig. It's exhausting. And, I know people can get intimidated by, you got to do a month of shows straight at the Fringe, but it's, to me, it's so energizing because you're walking around this beautiful city, you're seeing all these shows, and you're not spending all of your energy and your time traveling. You're, spending your energy doing the shows. That's the thing I love.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. It didn't feel like I was on the road. It felt like I was just in this amazing comedy fun time summer camp. I think it was just awesome. It was just awesome. And it's one of those things. And I've had other Fringe guests on, and I usually say the same thing. So people who tune in every week are probably tired of me going through this. But I, there are times where I felt like I was on top of the world. There were times where I felt like the biggest loser on the planet. And most times we're in between. Most times we're in between those two things. I mean, there was one day where I just had to take a step back and go, what an amazing freaking thing this is. I went to one of the panels where the guy who created In-Betweeners was there, which I loved that show when it came out. The British version. I've never seen the US one, but the British version I just freaking loved. Got to talk to the creator for a few minutes, but then I had to go run because I had to go flyer for my show. And a couple hours prior, I had seen one of my favorite acts out of the UK at a bar. And I'm like, wow, that's one day. That was one day. I got to do those three things in a day. And on top of that, I got to do an hour of stand-up, which is one of my favorite things to do in the world. Yeah. What a time.
Yeah, the best.
So what have been some of your favorite fringes besides Edinburgh? I mean, you mentioned a couple. Are there some more that you need to mention?
Edmonton 2018 was definitely my favorite. Partly just because that was the first time that hour really worked. And it was a huge risk for me. I mean, I was very poor at the time. And I remember the Edmonton Fringe set you up with you could stay with somebody. So I got free lodging, but I drove my little, Toyota Camry all the way from Chicago to Edmonton. It was a very, very long drive. I get up there, I have no money left. And, I'm staying with these people. They were so nice. They were these retired school teachers. They fed me every night. Again, I didn't have any money. And then I did 10 shows at that festival, and I had this great venue, the Yardbird Suite, this jazz venue. And one of the first nights I got a 4.5 star out of 5 review. And then I just sold a bunch of tickets, and I walked away with a lot of money for the first time. And I had zero money when I got there, to my name. And I just look back very fondly on that festival experience, because it was it really worked out. I just put myself out there, and it was okay. Because lots of other times, I've lost huge amounts of money, or have really been struggling to get by. But that one worked out, and it was really fun.
So
Vancouver was really fun too. Yeah. Vancouver was right after Edinburgh the first time. So I did August in Edinburgh 2019. And then right after, I went to do 10 days in Vancouver for that festival. So I did those back to back, and it was really fun. Yeah.
So let's talk about the new show. Have you run it a few times already, or have you just done bits and pieces, or where are you at?
Yeah. So I have 2 solo shows this year. One is the free Fringe show called Pastor! That's at 1:00 at the Keller. That's PBH Free Fringe. I have another solo show called Monkey Sermon at Hill Street Theater at 4:45 p.m. That show, okay, I'll explain that one first. That one is about 30 minutes of my stand-up. It's about 15 minutes of these videos that I've been editing that I'll play on a projector that are surreal road footage. There's some puppet stuff. There's a bunch of my childhood artwork. There's really cool ambient music that I've been making with friends. There's a bunch of field recordings, and exploring lots of sort of memories from what we've been talking about in these conversations. This conversation with you and I. So that's going on. It's a lot of exploration of my childhood, mixed with some of my stand-up and mixed with this pastor character. So that's that hour. I'm very excited for that one. That show's been in my head for 3 or 4 years, because coming out of quarantine, my parents moved from they moved houses, and they just found all this stuff that they had kept, all these drawings and writings and all this stuff from my life. And I just got that whole box, and I started looking through that box. And that led to huge discoveries about who I am and who I was and all this stuff. So this is my first time putting all of that into the show. And then my other show, my Free Fringe show, is Pastor, and that's an hour of this pastor character in a bar. It's like a satirical church service. It's so much fun. I've been doing that for about a year straight, and I've gotten a few chances to do really long sets, probably only about 10 times this past year. But I just did a preview show that did really, really well. And I know the shape of the show. I know the character really well. So I'm really excited to do that. And it's just going to keep getting funnier and funnier. And there's so much room to grow throughout the month. So yeah, sorry that was rambly, but that's two solo shows every day. And then I'm running a compilation show at night called Mishmash, which is a compilation of queer comics, clowns, POC comics, disabled comics. It's called Mishmash. It's a whole hodgepodge of performers, and I'll have different lineups every day. So that's my sort of networking, community organizing show at night at 8:00 at St. Stephen's Theater in the Vault. Yeah,
that's incredible. Yeah, that's an incredible run. How would you describe, how do you identify as far as sexuality goes?
I say pansexual, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah.
So has your preacher father seen the Preacher Show?
No.
Do you think he will? Do you want him to?
No. That's up to him.
Okay.
If I were to, I don't want to make any predictions. But my one disclaimer that I would say is that this stuff is tough. Like, I would hope that my dad can see that this show is satirizing, like pastors and sort of authoritarian speakers and the sort of rhetoric and the sort of narrow-mindedness of this sort of, doctrine and the sort of like the ways that these sort of pastors can be so manipulative with their rhythms and their like the way that they talk to crowds and stuff. So I'm definitely not making fun of him specifically, but if he does relate to some of the stuff, it is because he does some of it. But I'm trying to think of how to say this in how do I say this? A lot of the show is me making fun of like hacky pastors, like pastors who, instead of like speaking vulnerably and honestly and stuff, what makes their stuff effective is the timing and there's this shared rhythm and this shared performance style. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah. Well, I've watched some clips too. I mean, I know you got to describe it for the folks who haven't, but I mean, I got to say, I started laughing immediately just because of the freaking tie. And and I'll tell you this as a fun aside, I went to an all boys school in high school and we had to wear ties, and I could tell you there were some guys that wore their ties like that, not ironically, not playing a character. They were just that shitty at tying it. So it was very funny for me on multiple levels. But so
for the listeners, to explain the tie situation, the pastor wears a white shirt and a purple tie, but the sort of like piece of the tie that's behind the main part of the tie, that is like super, super long, like hanging way past the belt. And every time I put that tie on, it gets longer. That part gets longer. And I think it's a funny sight gag, and it's the thing. I kept making that thing longer and longer because I was going to open mics, and because the performance is convincing. Some people thought it was real. Some people thought I was a real pastor. If anyone listens to the jokes, they'll understand. Like this, to me, I think it's this beautiful satire because it's jokes about what I'm doing. If you have a literal interpretation of what I'm doing, then you won't get the act. And I think if you have a literal interpretation of religion, you might not really always get the most. You might not get the best sort of spiritual nourishment out of a literal interpretation. So the act forces you to engage with it in a non-literal way. You have to understand that it's a character that was designed. Anyway, so wearing the tie incorrectly is this immediate sight gag that shows you, oh, this is a comedy routine. And you would think that people would automatically understand that because I'm performing at comedy clubs or whatever. But some people, just because I, try to be a good actor, are like, oh, this person really is a pastor and came in and is like ambushing this comedy show. So the tie is an important part of the proving to the crowd that it's a bit.
Well, how do you identify religion-wise?
No specific religion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is that, would you say agnostic? Would you say, I mean, if you had to put it in a glass, which one
Sure
would you pick? And I know it's hard. I mean, I always say I'm either an atheist or an agnostic, depending on how you define it.
Yeah, it definitely is a sort of semantic issue. I'm definitely an agnostic because I don't know if there's a God. And, which technically all of us are agnostics. None of us know. And anyone who says that they do is, they're not right. People can believe, but nobody knows. So I don't know. And I think that's a great position to be in. And you can't know. I do probably, it's just sort of a matter of like, what do these words mean? In the sort of traditional definition of God, or the sort of Judeo-Christian definition of God, I definitely don't believe in that God. But if we're using the word God to sort of describe the totality of space and time and everything, like everything that exists, all being one thing, if that's God, then I believe in that. But it doesn't really require faith, because it's like, it gets so weird when we're putting these things into words. But all the stuff that exists, if we're to sort of add all that up and call that God, then I believe in that. But that's because that does exist. Because anyway, the sort of universe or whatever it is. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
But it's so hard to say out loud,
It's very hard to quantify because, and I even wrestle with it, myself, and I go back and forth because I always try to challenge myself on it. Every day I try to wake up, not even just when it comes to religion, but just when it comes to everything. Just wake up and ask yourself, am I wrong? Could I be wrong? Which, of course, you are about a bunch of things, but how many things? And I kind of have come to grips. I used to just be, well, I don't know. And I'm constantly seeking, but I don't know, and neither does anyone else. So let's just be nice to each other, which I am still for the most part. That's where I'm at. But I've had a little bit of self-reflection to the point, but I also don't believe in any of those man-made gods at all. And I think I go a step further because I actually take comfort in the belief that they for sure don't exist. Like I believe they don't exist, and I take some comfort in that. Just like other people, they take comfort in the idea that there is a God looking over all of this. I take comfort in the idea that there's not. I take comfort in the idea that, okay, if a supreme being decided to make a planet where 2 out of 3 people are starving and there's endless war and we're basically a parasite to their creation, that does not sound like a very considerate supreme being, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. So I take comfort in the belief that that's not out there. And I don't think it is, but I don't know for sure. So some belief is required.
Yeah. No, I'm right there with you. I always want to keep challenging my beliefs and keep learning things and growing and stuff. But I will say, definitely in the last several years, there's not one moment that I have where I get scared or I go, oh no, like, what if I'm joking about like all the stuff that I joke about, or the way that I engage with these topics, and the way that I look at the world, I do not fear that I'm doing it, that I'm doing something wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like, I do think my beliefs make sense to me, and they inform the way that I act and the way that I treat myself and other people. So I don't have this sort of fear of like, oh no, what if I'm wrong? I just don't have that,
Mm-hmm.
Which is good. What a relief, that's
no, totally.
That fear really was put in me intentionally, and that specific fear is gone.
which is wonderful. And just to clarify, even though I know you're not implying this, but just to clarify, I don't come at it from a place of fear, just a place of exploring, like asking the questions, like could I be wrong? Could I be? Where am I at on this? What am I really? Where are my faults at? I think it makes us human. I feel like. So, where could people go to learn more about you?
Check out my Instagram. It's just Andrew Frank Comedy _ I just recently started posting as the pastor on a separate account. I've been like co-publishing those posts because I don't have many followers as the pastor. I think he has like 70 followers right now. But it's pastor's account is the one true pastor with periods in between each word. And then my Instagram is Andrew Frank Comedy _ One thing I wanted to bring up real quickly while talking about the pastor is that, we're talking about queerness and talking about gender and stuff and talking about fringe performers and stuff. Not only is this pastor character, clowning and sort of character satire and stuff, but it really isn't influenced by lots of drag shows that I've seen because it is, as a non-binary comedian, it is in effect a drag performance because pastor is he, him, pastor is like trying to be the sort of like masculine, patriarchal Christian American father and pastor. So it's been so much fun to sort of make fun of sort of certain gender ideas and postures and inflections and stuff. It's been really fun to. It's a drag performance. The pastor, but pastor goes by he, him. Is my point.
Well, Andrew, thanks.
He worships he, him. Yeah.
Yes, Andrew, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
That was Andrew Frank. Be sure to follow them on IG. Check out their show if you're in Edinburgh. I am getting some FOMO with Edinburgh. I don't know if you guys could tell. You probably could. We've had a lot of Edinburgh-centric episodes as August is upon us, and I'm not going to be there this year. Wish I was. Music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Andrew Saxonell. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Baywatching Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support this show on the sustainability end, patreon.com/Ron Placone. For a give what you can level, you get all kinds of exclusive content, full stand-up clips not available anywhere else, access to exclusive events concerning my films and projects, insider info to projects not yet announced, and I'm going to restart the Zoom shows. I used to do Zoom shows. I'm going to restart those. So we got a really cool community going. Patreon.com/Ron Placone. You can join for as low as $1 a month. It's a pay what you can level. All right. We are almost past the number of presidents. That's the next big milestone. I mean, technically, we're right on it. We're right on the number of presidents. Next week, we'll officially be past it. And then we'll probably stay past it because we'll be significantly past it come November. See how that works with numbers and times and weeks and elections. Brilliant. See you next week. Peace. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1,000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1,000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1,000 is doing for me and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1,000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1,000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.